What is happening in there? J Game Dude here, and finally, I think we can all agree that it's great when Konami is actually able to kind of explain themselves a little bit, because I think this is maybe the first time I've seen them actually explain the details around why they created the new Forbidden and Limited list in the current format of December 2022. So I thought, you know what, let's just kind of go through it. Unfortunately, it doesn't explain how they picked the cards that they ban and, the reasoning behind that. I think it's just more so in relation to the current meta, the game, and the way in which it's played at the moment. So I figured we'd go through this. So Newly Forbidden, Mystic Mine, and Curious the Lightsworn Dominion. Mystic Mine has recently become a key card in competitive dueling, forcing many duelists to include cards in their deck that can get it off the field, so encouraging the use of back row removal, or risk losing once Mystic Mine is played. With Mystic Mine now forbidden, duelists no longer have to consider the possibility of this controversial field spell card stalling a duel for several consecutive turns. And it's interesting that they mentioned that because it pretty much Konami have just admitted that the card is in fact controversial, and so the fact that it's been legal for as long as it has is quite surprising to know about. And if they knew that it was going to be controversial when they did find out that it was, I'm surprised that they didn't take action then. But Konami isn't known to really take much action unless there's some sort of uproar, and I think this card should have been banned years ago, simply put. But it's at least interesting to know that we kind of know the mentality behind the way in which Konami was thinking in regards to Mystic Mine. And I've already made a video on that, which I will link in the description below, about Mystic Mine finally being banned, and a little bit more sort of detail within that. Curious the Lightsworn Dominion was a popular card, especially among Terra Elements. Terra Elements is actually, I think, is currently the biggest meta threat currently in, or rather the biggest deck in the meta, and especially Ishizu Terra Elements. So it's interesting that we're getting rid of one of their best cards, which is Curious the Lightsworn Dominion, because it allows you to take cards and send them to your graveyard quite easily, because the ability to mill your cards is very important for Terra Elements, since it's very dependent, it makes use of cards in your graveyard, treating it like a second hand, and Terra Elements like their cards in their graveyard. I think that's the main thing. But yeah, perhaps most importantly, it's able to send a card of your choosing to the graveyard. The fact that it's a card of your choosing is even more interesting, because a card like the burial cards, for example, they're one of them is limited, and that's being able to just send one card to your graveyard. That's all it is. Foolish Burial. The fact that it's limited kind of makes you wonder just how powerful a graveyard can be, especially I think in the more modern meta with Yu-Gi-Oh. Sending highly impactful cards. Again, the fact that you can choose is probably the most important thing, rather than milling random cards from your deck to the graveyard. And return them with Nightmare Griffin, and use them to annihilate an opponent's chance of winning. So essentially, by banning Curious, what they're really doing is removing a potentially unwinnable situation. Which part of the combo is Erratic Epidemic Virus, Deck Devastation Virus, alongside Nightmare Griffin. But rather than hitting all of these cards, they're only hitting Curious, which is a curious thing to do. The addition of Curious to the Forbidden list prevents this from happening and deals a blow to decks like Terra Elements, which made the most effective use of Curious, so that's good to know. And now the newly limited, this was also in relation to Terra Elements, given that they're easily a tier 1 deck. I don't know if they've hit tier 0 yet, and I don't think they will. I think they've just tier 1. But Herald of Orange Light has been limited, because it stops an opponent's Monsterific while sending one of the Ishizu cards to their graveyard, which is where they absolutely love to be, because that allows you to mill cards to the graveyard. 5 cards, I think, off the top of your deck. Which is, again, kind of in relation to Curious, an important part of what it means to be using the Terra Element deck. The fact that they love their cards in the graveyard. So it all kind of goes back into itself. As if drawing wasn't bad enough, it seems like milling is now just as, important aspect of Yu-Gi-Oh! That now needs to be toned down because of specific decks that now currently exist. And you might be thinking, why don't they ban any Terra Element cards? Well, Konami has been known to not hit cards that are newly released, and Terra Elements released as part of one of the couple of newer packs, especially the Power of the Elements expansion packs. So there's that. And yeah, using fairy type Ishizu pronunciations of Ishizu monsters from Magnificent Mavens into them as well. So that was also another recently released. They're not going to ban the Ishizu cards anyways because it's shaken up the meta to an insane degree so far. And even more so is that I think after about a year or so, maybe a couple of years, potentially, we could see those cards getting banned. But it depends on like how they're used. So newly limited, Herald of Orange Light from, I'm pretty sure it's unlimited to 1 copy. Semi-limited is where you can only have maximum 2 copies of a card. So it's a Luralisk Recital Starling, which was previously limited, so now it's semi. Bumped up to 2 copies per deck effective December 1st. Luralisk strategy hasn't been popular in competitive dueling, so this change may give them a much needed boost. So they're aware that Luralisk is in fact an important part of... Recital Starling is an important part of the Luralisk deck, so they're wanting to kind of bring that back a little bit. And honestly, the move for being able to move cards straight into your graveyard by milling them might be a great thing, because now, removed from the forbidden lists and limited lists, we have Dimensional Fissure and Macrocosmos. So these two are very specific cards that I feel like should have been unbanned or unlimited ages ago, and should have been like unlimited completely. So unlimited meaning you could have a maximum of 3 copies of these cards. Dimensional Fissure and Macrocosmos are exactly the same in the sense that rather than sending cards to the graveyard, if a card were to be sent to the graveyard, it's sent out of play instead. So these 2 cards are used to counter graveyard specific plays and stopping your opponent from being able to send cards to the graveyard. Essentially stopping things like Terra Elements and the Ishizu cards from having, being able to let them do what they do. So that's actually a very interesting thing for them to remove both of these cards, because they do the exact same thing. Macrocosmos is a trap card, whereas Dimensional Fissure is a spell card. So that's really the only difference between these two, but they do exactly the same. And yeah, they can completely shut down Terra Elements easily, since virtually all monsters in Terra Element decks need to be sent to the graveyard to use their most powerful effects. Exactly what I was mentioning earlier, they love to be in the graveyard. Telenite Timaeus, which was just removed from the forbidden list. Again, yeah, we are now moving into a position whereby rather than being able to use the graveyard, we're using cards that are able to circumvent the use of the graveyard and go straight into and out of, sending them out of play, sending them to the banished zone, which is usually like, once cards go there, you really can't do much with them or much about them. In fact, I think the only cards that can really make use of cards from that space is Return from the Different Dimension, but that card is currently banned, so I don't think we see much in the way of that card being unbanned, especially now. And finally, with the Mystic Mind being banned, we finally get back Metaverse and Fire Formation Tenki, which are in relation to being able to search out field spell cards in your deck. And because Mystic Mind was a field spell, these cards were put away in with the sole intention of not being able to spam or use Mystic Mine. So they did have some amount of self-awareness, at least, or like, when I say that, I mean Konami. Like, Konami had some sense of self-awareness, knowing that Mystic Mine might be somewhat problematic, and that's interesting to know. So with all that said and done, the fact that they're bringing back Metaverse and Fire Formation Tenki to unlimited status means that field spell cards are not as problematic anymore. And in fact, I think the only ones that are actually kind of banned at the moment, off the top of my head, should be Chicken Game for the ability to draw one card, and now Mystic Mine. So yeah, field spell cards haven't really seen much competitive play, but they would have to be outright broken for them to be able to see competitive play at the moment, with how the power creep has affected Yu-Gi-Oh! And I suppose that comes with the territory of being a card game that has been around for so very long. But this is sort of my analysis of the news that's been provided to us by Konami. It'll be interesting to see what people say in the comments below. But if you have any thoughts about this, let me know. If this was a little bit more of a complicated video because you don't really watch or play as much Yu-Gi-Oh!, again, let me know. This was definitely more for people who are really like in the who have been following Yu-Gi-Oh! At least for the past year and a bit, like myself, who kind of understand, you know, what's happening, what's going on, and all the rest of it. So if you've got any thoughts, feel free to put them in the comments below. But other than that, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.